President of CII Coimbatore region, Mr.ASHOK, incoming Chairman of the CII Coimbatore region, Dr. ARAM, distinguished friends. I feel at home, so I don't have to be too formal. It's home for me. When Ashok first mentioned to me that he's having his annual day session, if I could be available to come and speak, I was naturally enthusiastic, always looking for an excuse to Coimbatore. But I was also keen to understand what could be an interesting topic to talk about, what could be relevant, what could be worth sharing. And you can always think of 3 or 4 topics of interest, especially in a district like this, has a very strong culture, very economy, multiple sectors. But I have chosen the topic of infrastructure because the more I travel around the world, the more economies I see in action. The distinguishing feature of the successful ones versus the less successful ones seems to be an organized cooperation between the public sector and the private sector in the build-up of enabling infrastructure. What do I first mean by infrastructure? Let's qualify the word, and then let me share with you 5 points, which I hope to do in the 30 minutes which I've been given to you today. The hard infrastructure is always very clear. It's electricity and water, transportation and logistics, it's commercial and residential real estate, it's waste management and sanitation. There's soft infrastructure as well, enabling, that is education and skills, healthcare and nutrition, rule of law and public institutions. Why do I think more and more that infrastructure seems to be the critical bottleneck, not only when I look at a region like Coimbatore, or Tamil Nadu as a state, or India as a country? The more I travel around, particularly when I visit countries like India, you feel like there are such hard-working entrepreneurs, tremendous determination, tremendous will to survive and grow. But not just in business. You see that in healthcare, you see that in education, you see that in many, many fields. But the more I think about it, the biggest question I struggle with is what we basically see are islands of excellence, lots of islands of excellence, connected by a sea of inefficiency. What you see is islands of excellence connected by a sea of inefficiency. So you can go and visit a factory. Inside the compound of the factory, it looks pretty good. The moment you step out, it's a whole different world. You go to a private person's house, the material in which the house is built is good, but the provision of water and electricity is a lot to be desired. So you go to a hospital, you know, the fundamental hardware seems to be okay, the core of it technically seems to be okay, but then you look at waste management, access to the hospital, the flow of patients, there seems to be a lot to be desired. So if I elaborate on that, what you see is islands of excellence based on hard work and determination combined with a sea of inefficiency based on poor governance and cooperation with the private sector. Then when you go to countries who seem to be doing much better, and I'm not talking about the advanced countries alone, like Germany or Japan or the United States, but even if you go to countries like Korea, which probably through sheer hard work and determination has been one of the few countries that pulled themselves completely out of poverty through prosperity and industrialization in a period of 35 years. You see that happening in countries like Turkey and Poland a little bit more now as well. What you see is sometimes a lot of work in creating a sea of efficiency, and then even moderate quality is successful because the overall system seems to work. And that's a very key question we should ask ourselves. How much can we actually improve and do well by just focusing on our island and ignoring the sea? Because you'll reach the limits of growth, you know, what they call in financial terms the beta of growth, reach it much ahead. And if you actually adjust for inflation, sometimes you actually don't go at all. So, at a nominal level, you might see 7%, 10%, 12% growth. If you adjust for inflation, sometimes you see systems are not growing at all. So that is why I feel infrastructure is a critical topic. It has severe implications for businesses, has severe implications for institutions. What generally happens when the systemic infrastructure is weak is to overcompensate. You spend a lot more on OPEX and you underinvest in CAPEX. So since you're always looking for workarounds to compensate, we're spending a lot more money on operational expenditure. And hence the ability to invest in capital expenditure and to improve productivity and throughput starts suffering. And in a globalized world, then your cost competitiveness starts suffering. The second topic that I want to talk about linked to the case of infrastructure. I hope I've made an impact in terms of saying why I believe the case of infrastructure. It's important. The second point I want to make is there should be an evolutionary change in our approach on this matter. Typically, the way infrastructure works in many countries, there's lobbying and there's feeding. In structures, in democratic structures in particular, where the relationship between business and politics is one of parity, there's lobbying. In democratic structures, where the relationship between business and politics is slightly more unequal, there's a lot of pleading. But pleading has less effect because the collective effort to negotiate gets compromised by the individual need forward and compromise the law. So, if I ask myself, I'm running a business or I'm running an institution, I need so many things for which I have to work with the state. A lot of things in the state where I have to negotiate, I have to compromise, get by and to get things done. At the same time, if I don't have a channel in which to collectively negotiate hard on matters of infrastructure, my relative position in a globalizing world is going to fundamentally weaken in every passing decade. Because there was a fundamental growth story, which took us from maybe $600 per capita to about $1,200 per capita. If you continue on a beta manner, you might get to $2,500 per capita. But even countries which are paying $8,000, $10,000, like Malaysia and Turkey, jumping to $18,000, $20,000 requires systemic improvement in the organization of infrastructure. The CII could be one of those organizations. I am familiar with the realities of how negotiation happens with politicians both in the center and the state. I'm familiar with the trepidation in which sometimes these discussions happen with leaders. So I'm not speaking from a perspective of idealism. I'm just speaking in a very realistic manner. There has to be a framework where the negotiating systems have to be harder and the demands have to be a lot firmer in negotiating with the public sector, particularly the public sector. Otherwise, you might be running at 60 miles just to stay where you are and have the illusion of growth mainly coming from inflation. But on a relative basis, a lot of your competitors around the world, you might eventually fall behind. But they seem to be getting aspects of this organized a lot further. Particularly in East Asia, aspect of the Middle East now, and some people have factor advantages. Turkey is at the periphery of the European Union. Parts of Arabia have oil and gas advantages. We as a country don't have, so on and so forth. Point number 3, some pragmatic steps with hope of some value. I do believe one thing that, and maybe you already do it, so let me not be presumptuous, but I do believe organizations like the CII should, I was just asking, one thing I never quite understood about the CII was why is it a change of leadership every 1 year? And why is it then 2 years at a national level? I mean, I asked during one of the CII national events, they had a probably a corner in Davos about 3 years ago, and I was talking with some people there, asking Mr. Bajal and further that question, and why is it that it keeps changing so often? Because in most jobs, you need a year to settle down. You need about a year and a half to get something done, and about 9 months of successfully to a successor. At least takes 3 years. But I presume there is a method, and let's leave it at that. But if you take the regional grouping like this, I think there will be some value in doing periodic economic surveys, hardcore empirical surveys, including sociological inputs at a regional level. Example, you made a point to the region, but it could be, other regions as well. Now, why do I say that a survey like this is needed? If you look at any part of the world, there are sub-regions which always do better than other regions. The world has never been a homogeneous place, and never will be. Right? If you take Japan, the region Kansai and Kanto are the two regions where 80% of the industrial output comes out. Greater Tokyo region and the Greater Osaka region, including Kobe, Nagoya, and those areas. You go to Germany, the Baden-Württemberg region around Stuttgart, Hamburg, parts of Cologne, that's where 70% of the industrial output comes out. Very natural. America has the same split. Northeastern United States with financial sector and education, Western United States with information technology, Southern United States energy, Southern United States manufacturing. Divisions of labor and wealth. That's natural. But most of this region which are successful in interacting with other regions of the world, as well as with their own regional and central governments, they have a very clear perceived notion of their strengths. And you can never have a clear perceived notion of strengths and weaknesses unless you do regular surveys to see what the empirical evidence is of output, input, cost, revenue, and so forth. I've never got a clear answer in my 15 years of OSCE as to what is the total revenue base that the economic region provides. How much of that goes to the state? How much of that goes to the center? How much of that comes back from the center? How much of that comes back from the state? I've never got a clear answer. I've got some vague answers. In complex, usually you get a clear answer, but that's a small part of the total pie. But in items like that, there has to be a better integration of data. But that data allows you to negotiate harder to overcome access constraints. That gives you the economic basis both in funding political parties or in terms of providing revenues to the national revenue base, in asking for an organized fair share of that capital to come back for long-term capital expenditure needs. My two concerns, interestingly, when I look at a region like Coimbatore, I never get too concerned. It's all relative, but too concerned on the soft infrastructure around education and skills and healthcare and nutrition. On a relative basis, we all know this district is far ahead of many other districts. No space for complacency. Sometimes quantitative expansion doesn't always lead to qualitative expansion. So there needs to be some rebalancing there too. But my concern is more around electricity and water. A decent chunk of the economic strength of the city originally comes from manufacturing strengths. It comes through industry. And when I first heard that there was a foundry conflict going on here over the last 2 days, I had a lot of sympathy for the entrepreneurs here. How do you run a proper foundry when your electricity is off 8 hours, 7 hours, 6 hours? I just don't know. And how do you get an order from a German company or a Japanese company when you're not able to commit to certain delivery time at the pace at which they're operating? And then I was just in Germany 2 weeks ago with the delegation of 2 people from Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, mainly on the petrochemical sector. And this gentleman is building a very successful company. He's exporting a lot to the United States. The United States and Japan are his main markets. Because he's investing a lot on what is called 3D printing now. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of 3D printing. In manufacturing, especially customized manufacturing, as people look for lighter materials, which means away from iron and steel and more towards aluminum and specialized alloys and carbon fiber and other areas, this is going to probably have the most profound impact in manufacturing in 20 years. Now, the need for electricity becomes even more important, right? You cannot run it purely based on diesel generator sets. That system just doesn't work. I was very excited 5 years ago when there was this mobile phone explosion going on in India. We were adding about 30 million subscribers a month at one point in time. Bill, once when I was talking to Sunil Mittal, he told me that off his base stations, about 35% work on diesel generator sets. That's not a great outcome for a country which does not have oil and gas. Right? So certain countries have strengths. There are other strengths we have as a country. But one of the strengths we don't have as a country, and we won't have as a country, is generosity in hydrocarbons. We just don't have it. We don't have oil, we don't have gas. We definitely don't have it for the size of our economy and the size of our population, and our lifestyle and industrial. We just don't. So we will be a perpetual importer, at least till as long as I'm alive, unless there's a whole different style to energy production. So 40 to 50% of our import bill will always be hydrocarbons. That's not going to change. If our currency doesn't strengthen, we are always going to be perpetually inflation. I mean, a high energy intensive economy completely based on imports, which is very similar to what Japan and Korea had, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, predicates a minimum level of exports, which predicates a minimum level of total competition. And those factors then come back to play with the infrastructure. So when I say this point, I'm not saying it out of, we don't have to do it out of goodwill. We don't have to do it out of a sense of charity or philanthropy. I think these are necessities to survive and grow and thrive. And I think that point is important. Now, in the short run, before a framework for negotiating hard public sector is developed, you'll have to work on short-term linkages. You'll have to benefit from regions that have greater negotiating power. So we do know Bangalore and Chennai have greater negotiating power than this region. It's a fact of reality. They're working on a corridor, have long-term Japanese funding, pretty much organized with that. And there are some German and Korean governments which want to contribute to that as well. Now with 440 kilometers from Chennai and 350 kilometers from Bangalore, you have to figure out how you want to piggyback on that. What are the access points you need to piggyback on that, given that there's a large supplier base in the manufacturing sector here anyway. How do you piggyback on their negotiating power to strengthen your linkages? Second, I've always said, it's very difficult for Coimbatore. I've seen that over the last 10-15 years in multiple bilateral and multilateral conversations. Somehow the city is struggling to get its foot in the transportation logistics. Whether it's airport, railways, highways, it's struggling to get its foot into the whole Bangalore region. Now, the only way you overcome that is then, in the short run at least, finding ways to link up to the two closest local quality airports you have, 5 hours radius, and a single quality airport is Mumbai. These are the differentiating advantages of these two cities. They have world-class ports, world-class airports, and a reasonably good financial system. Right? How do you connect with these two cities? It's very important from an access perspective. How do you connect with the Bangalore-Chennai corridor from an industrial perspective? Very critical. This is more piggybacking in the short run as you organize your negotiating power around core infrastructure. Last but not least, point number 4, I have 11 minutes left, is contextualizing it on a stretched basis. Sometimes what I find a little bit disappointing, even when I speak to very smart, very well-educated people in Chennai or Coimbatore, when they're traveling or when I see them outside, sometimes even in Delhi, is how we are contextualizing our needs. We have to contextualize our needs on a stretched basis. So, we all know power was a huge problem in the last 2 years. Now, most of us, I remember when I came here 7 years ago, I said there was going to be a massive power problem in the state. It was so clear to me. And there were some pessimistic people who agreed with me, and their shortage estimation was about 2,400 megawatts. Now, I would venture forth to say that your shortage is something about 15,000 megawatts. Okay, and people say, oh my God, that's a ridiculous number. Where do you get that number from? Think through your lifestyles. Look at the way you live in your houses. Look at the way your kids live. Look at the way your architects are coming up with their buildings, hospitals, colleges, what the need for electricity and water there are. Look at the aspirational set, which is coming with the next generation, and then contextualize in a different way. Tamil Nadu is roughly the size geographically of Italy. Take square kilometers, it's the size of Italy. It's roughly the same population. Italy is about 59 million and shrinking. Tamil Nadu is about 64 million and growing. Some say 67. I don't know which is the right number, let's say 67, right? Tamil Nadu GDP is roughly about 120 to 160 billion. It's that range. Italy's GDP is about 1.7 trillion. Okay? So, if you want even, and Italy is not your top 5, Italy is top 10. Right? Italy is not Germany, Italy is not the United States, Italy is not Japan. Right? But it is still the 6th largest exporter in the world. It's part of your present problem. And all of Italy is actually as rich as Germany. So, still a significant economy in the world. Now, take the numbers. My sister and myself have always had this debate now for close to 10 years. She's slowly coming around to my view. What was that debate? I always said there's at least about, in a state like Tamil Nadu, about 50 medical colleges missing. And in a country like India, about 300 medical colleges missing. She always said the medical council never gives a license to start a medical college. It's like climbing the Himalayas and blah, blah, blah. And, by the way, the doctor's income are already getting diluted because there's too much supply and so on and so forth. Now, all the arguments which were used in the early 80s in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka are on engineering education. Right? And I venture forth to say that if we are a software power, the Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, to a certain extent, corridor today, it's because of the qualitative expansion in engineering education. We are not who we are in IT because we have 5 IITs. 15,000 students a year would not have done that. We are where we are because there are about 150,000 people coming out, of which about 40,000 are of reasonable quality. Maybe 30,000 of poor quality, 50,000 in the middle of, with some training of reasonable quality. Right? It's that supply side expansion which has contributed to success. And I always believe a lot of our success will have come from supply side expansion. Trust me, you provide a city like this with another 3,000 megawatts of power, there will be enough entrepreneurs here capable of using it in an active manner. Right? And that's why I venture forth to say the actual shortage of power in this state is not the 4,000, 5,000 which are being discussed even today. Your actual shortage is something like 20,000 megawatts. Take a 10-year view. If all those individual aspirations are true. Now the chances are that 20,000 megawatts is not reached and the individual aspirations are missed. Or the individual aspirations translates to a determination to expand the power sector in an intensive manner, and then the aspirations are met. But it's one or the other. It's ultimately the laws of economics catch up. The second is also in planning. One is of course aspiration. It's always more fun to grow. It's always more fun to expand. It's always, if you own land, it's always to see the city to expand, the population to grow, and so forth. But there should be certain constraining factors as well in this contextualization on a stretch basis. So just as I say on power, we chronically underestimate our needs. On the population real estate front, we chronically overestimate our water availability. Right? I think one of the biggest constraints to economic planning and growth will be the genuine availability of water. Now, there has to be some forward-looking planning on a 10-15 year basis. How much can we actually have in terms of water? What are the natural factors? What are the storage factors? How much can you reverse engineer that and say, that is something we can conservatively say is a predictable capacity. Now then, how much population can the city afford, or can a region afford? Is it 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, 1 million? There has to be a correlation with that. If it is a deeply constraining factor, certain industries may not be good, and certain industries could be all right. So, for example, we are working now, and I see this in Abu Dhabi, a city which produces the 8th largest producer of oil. 70% of oil today, by the way, goes to Korea, Japan, and China, not to Europe and the United States, which shows how the world is shaping. We are still a bit Eurocentric and American-centric in our views, but the big change in the world which will happen is in East Asia, around manufacturing and industrialization. They cannot go down certain streams of petrochemicals. They just can't. There are certain petrochemicals in which they will be very successful. There are certain petrochemicals in which they will not, because they don't have water. You can only desalinate so much water if you have cheap energy. So, estimating the power demand in a more accurate way on the outside, and estimating the water supply, genuine water supply, and factoring that into your medium-term planning, and if a collective organization like the CII, I think is very critical. So, for example, I know poultry is a big expanding sector. If you put oil jumps from those places. A lot of chicken producers, chicken feed producers. You look at the two countries which are leaders, they have the highest density of water in their country. Brazil, or Latin America, France, Europe, Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, that belt is Asia, right? Last point, before I wrap up. Assuming the first 4 steps, there's a reasonable amount of success. Funding models to pursue that have to be designed with complementarity. The first funding model, of course, is federal expenditure, what in India we call national expenditure, national hydro authority bonds, and instruments of that nature. The second is what we call provincial expenditure. Water, for example, is generally a provincial topic. State is what you call state expenditure here. Now, the factor which has not been estimated properly enough yet is local expenditure. So if you look at many parts of the world which have comparative advantages in infrastructure, hence the entrepreneurs from that region, even who are mediocre, succeed, is they have a very strong regional financial structure. They either issue municipal bonds, they have regional financing structures, or local PPP models, and that is something. What should be pure state, what should be PPP, what should be pure private sector? I think, especially power, for example, can there be a framework by passing the state, let's say you dismiss the grid from the state, but the private sector is willing to pay an acceptable IRR, say 12% to 14%. Does that give an entrepreneur the ability to build up combined cycle plants, in gas and coal, for example, natural gas and clean coal, and then provide it successfully in the industrial sector? So those are the topics which I think need a little bit more delving, rather than showing up with another petition and another meeting saying, we have a power problem and can you do something about it, sir or madam? There are limits to how much you can get out of that. I mean, you'll get something out of it, don't get me wrong. I'm not undermining those efforts. I'm saying that may not be enough relative to your aspiration set. Now, if these issues are fixed, as I've said, and they are fixable, so we are not talking about insurmountable issues here, I do believe that the individual efforts for which we should all be very proud in our islands of excellence can have multiple factors of growth over the next generation, where more than 50% of the population knows less than 25 years of age. So then you really benefit from that demographic dividend, and then you become a very, very important player. Even otherwise, survive, remain a mediocre player, and that doesn't mean you have a bad quality of life, it may not be broadly distributed, but it will be a missing out of the aspiration set for at least a generation. Now, which means, if you ask yourself individually what you need, I ask myself the same question. That means if we spend 80% of our time for our individual aspirations, we will have to find a way to spend 20% of our time for our collective aspirations. Because if those collective aspirations, those 20% is well spent, and that combined negotiating power is indeed hard, the benefit of those 80%, the return of those 80% over a 10-year cycle will be far superior than if you spend 100%. With that, let me conclude. I thank you for your time.
If any of us in the audience would like to have any questions for the Chief Guest, please feel.
While we're waiting for questions, Ashok, I thought I'll give you some sense of, you brought up this transition issue at the leadership. At least in Tamil Nadu State, I know Dinesh, who's current chair, he practically took up all the objectives and vision and the action items that the previous chairman took up, and then continued from there. So even though there is a transition, that's happened for the first time, as a matter of fact. And I don't think many states do the same stuff, but at least in Tamil Nadu, I think that's actually, and as a matter of fact, when you took up the theme for Bangalore, I just assumed the same theme for Tamil Nadu, and then saved myself some words coming exercise.
So have you ever tried to talk to our politicians, bureaucrats, or their mindset changeable?
I have. The problem you have is, it's not an issue of politicians, bureaucrats, private sector businessmen, academics. In every space, you have enough good people, and in every space, you have enough people who are obstructionists, or so either they want to obstruct or they want to take a shortcut. So typically you have a guy in the private sector who wants to take a shortcut, and you have a guy in the bureaucracy or in the political class who want to be obstructionists for financial gain, right? Having said that, there are enough people. So even if I look at parts of our civil service system, you can find about 20-30% of the population easily who will share your views. Now, their ability to deliver might be constrained because of the ecosystem in which they operate. It's a very fair point. The discussion with the political system has actually gotten worse because you've had a situation. I mean, listen, I'm speaking freely here, but if I look at the change, so you had a system which was fairly stable and unproductive for about 25 years, what you call the license rounds, right? So you paid the money to get the license, and you made sure you paid a bit, nobody else got the license, so the quasi-monopolies kind of survived. Then we started liberalizing, there was a genuine sense of competition, there was growth, access channels opened up, there was a declogging of the system, which lasted for about 10, 12 years. Then you had a situation where you had 10 to 15 years of growth, and naturally because of growth, infrastructure challenges have become apparent, right? Water, electricity. If we hadn't grown, these challenges would not have come. So we have grown for 10, 15 years, and the challenges around water, electricity, power, all of these factors are coming in. Naturally there, the state comes in and plays a big role, right, around access. And there the greed has become immense over the last 5, 7 years, 10, I'd argue. So you had suboptimal decision making based on short-term expediency on the political side. So yes, that's a genuine issue, right? Now, again, even if you say that, if you look at a country like India, for every state where you see a pathetic situation, you find states which are actually doing very well. And when you have 10 years of good work in the state and 10 years of bad work in the state, the gap just expands. It's so visible when it expands. So it is possible, but I also believe to a certain extent, if you look at, you have to speak to the older guys in Germany and Japan, the guys who were around in the 60s and early 70s, late 50s. Or you speak to the Koreans who are now in top positions because they were in their 30s and 40s when Korea went through that difficult phase. They were tough with politicians. Now, I know it's difficult yours for which you need their favor, so you have to be nice to them, and then still how can you be hard if they're vindictive, and so on and so forth. But at a collective level, if you're not hard, saying we are contributing to your largest, we are contributing to your fund. Normally everybody contributes to every party anyway. So there needs to be a much harder discussion. And if you don't have that hard discussion, you will still be fine, but you will be that island of excellence, and that will limit your potential. So you will be batting below your potential all the time. Because the ecosystem is not supporting. I've seen some fantastic entrepreneurs in India not able to grow because there are systemic constraints which don't allow them to deliver. I've gone to countries like Turkey or Korea where I've seen medium-level players, but in a very efficient system. But your average is ultimately the system and yourself as an individual, right? So the rebalancing of optimization of, when I say individual, I don't mean a human being alone. I mean a company, an institution, whichever way you look at it. You will have to combine that with the average going up. The infrastructure here is so critical. It's so critical. And I think the discussions have to be hard. They can be activistic. They can be activist. I mean, I think it's a terrible shame that such a highly educated state like Tamil Nadu, with average education levels are much above the national average. I don't think it was dumbness which did not allow us to see the power problem 10, 12 years ago. You could see the demand was going up. In fact, there's a global recession at the moment. That's why the power situation is not as bad as it should be. The economy was doing reasonably well, and the world was doing reasonably well. The problem would have been a lot worse. So, you have more experience in this matter than I do, but somehow if there's not a hard negotiation on this matter, you could lose out on a generation of growth. And when I say generation of growth, I mean relative to our aspirations. We are, if you look at emerging markets, I'm not even talking about the developed markets, say 10 countries, right? Emerging markets, there are about 25 countries in the world which are aspirationally moving forward. India is one of them. Within that, our size makes us look bigger because we're 1.2 billion people, so the absolute numbers always look big. We get compared to China and so on and so forth. In reality, we are in the fourth quartile in most measures. So when I debate with my sister on doctors, I know in a developed country it's 5 doctors per 1,000 people. In some of the better developing countries, it's 3 doctors per 1,000 people. In India, it's 1.1 doctor per 1,000 people. So that's why for me, if there's another 100 medical colleges, I'm not good at all. The system will absorb it. Just like we absorb 30,000 software engineers. The system can absorb another 200,000 nurses a year. There's a shortage of nurses. That will create a lot more employment. So some of these are also mindset issues, which still a lot of if you look at a lot of bureaucrats who are, by the time you're a national secretary or state secretary, you're in your late 40s, 56, 57, 5 years in retirement, whatever. A lot of their mindset is still based on those 5-year planning cycles, 5th-year plan and 10-year plan and all that stuff. But not in a stretched manner. So relative to our potential, we're underachieving. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Ashok, I have a question. This is specific to power infrastructure. While Coimbatore is at the short end of the stick, it's not only lack of power, we suffer from inequitable distribution of power. We try doing whatever which has to be done and we are completely ignored. But however, our district, by nature, we have a wind power capacity. That's about 2,400 to 3,000 megawatts, which is available 5 months in a year. Now, there is a chance, I think by the end of next year, the LNG pipeline will come here. Some of the industry associations, we have access to land also, about 120 acres of land. Would it be possible to crystallize or guide us on a PPP where we can have an LNG fired or like you said, multiple cycle coal LNG with the gas for the district of Coimbatore as a broad concept? And of course, we need your help us crystallize the funding aspects of this and the formation of such a staff and all that. Of course, we will have a battle with the state utility as far as the last mile distribution goes, but we have to take it up. The LNG, I think, is coming from Kochi, but Rock and Kaima, I think they've done some deal here.
But if you look at the notes to my speech, I had two examples under contextualizing on a special basis. I mentioned the 3D printing part, and I think it's going to have a big impact on manufacturing technology. But the second is, of course, renewables. By renewables, I mean natural gas at one end, solar, and then the spectrum on the other side as well. So the guys who run Deutsche, it's actually a subsidiary of the Works. England, they ended up buying 7 ports in India, so about 40% of them. You know which are the two biggest ports of India? It's Dubai and Singapore. So the big ships can't come to India, they come to Singapore and Dubai, and then we can India. That's what's happening. So yes, the gas pipeline, coming to a specific point, I think India still has the value going for combined cycle plants. So you can use gas in certain parts of the cycle, coal in other parts. Because I personally believe coal prices will come down. The biggest energy revolution going on in the world at the moment is in the United States. Because of their ability to perfect fracking, the gas price in America has come down to $3.50. If you look at the last 5 years, last 3 years, the 4 years ago, American power plants were burning 45% of their energy using coal and 30% using gas. In the last 4 years, it is reversed. So it's 45% using gas, 30% using coal. So obviously there's a surplus. Now, why does it matter what America does? At $14 trillion GDP, it's the biggest economy in the world. Whatever happens in America matters everywhere, right? So coal prices are coming down. I believe that continuing will go on for some time. So in a country like India, where we don't have anything in here, kind of importing most of the stuff anyway, it makes sense to hedge it a little bit, gas and coal. Now, believe it or not, in spite of all the problems, there's a shortage of power everywhere. Turkey needs another 100,000 megawatts of power, for which they're looking for money. And roughly, if you do the maths, so you have nuclear, you have gas, and you have coal. In nuclear, every megawatt costs you about $1,300. Sorry, $1.3 million. A gas plant costs you about $900,000, and a coal plant about $700,000. Right? So if you're building a 1,000 megawatt plant, you need $1.5 billion for a nuclear plant and $700 million for coal. And gas is $1 billion. The IRRs which you need for them today to raise funds are about 12 to 14%. Now, I believe based on the demand you have here, the latent demand here, I don't see any concern in raising a 12 to 14% IRR model. Because you have in Western Europe, Japan, and in parts of the United States, an aging population, right? So the pension funds are looking for returns, the insurance companies are looking for returns. And they typically need about 5% if it's developed market risk, and they need about 12% if it's emerging market risk. Now, the three constraints which I focused on immediately are the power purchase agreement for the model. That's very weak in India. I know that from speaking to the power guys. But you can perfect it. It's a state level topic. Use enough leverage to be able to perfect it. And then you have to make sure that the currency depreciation is factored in somehow. Because given the present model we have, even when the rupee appreciated a bit, I've never changed my mind. I worked at a rupee depreciating 3% a year for the last 80 years. Some years I'm wrong, some years I'm right, but generally over the last 20 years I've not been wrong. Because we import 40% of oil and gas. So whenever the government is a bit loose, you see the impact comes. And I've always argued that you should pursue a strong rupee policy. Exporters might complain a bit, but it will force them to improve their productivity anyway. But it will keep the inflation very low because of one investment. It's possible. Yes, I'll be very happy to support it.
of CI Coimbatore and other distinguished guests who are here with us today evening. Signature Day for Coimbatore CI zone has always been the annual day when we get a memorable speaker to come in and then give a very macro, high level state of affairs viewpoint, come encouragement, come direction for all of us, especially for the head board in particular. This year, as Chairman Ashok said, we've had an excellent turnout, one of the best turnouts that I've seen last 10 years that I've been coming to annual days in CI, and definitely not a small measure because of stature of a distinguished chief guest for today's function, Mr. ASHOK. And not going to go back into the intros or anything, except to say that we often, I'm sure we all travel, everybody goes out, everybody sees the world, a lot of amateur economists and philosophers amongst us. But very often we go out and see, but we don't see the big picture. Just look, but we don't see. And I guess what differentiates Ashoka from the common man, the clarity of vision, which spoke today, crispness of the summary, and the faultless rationale that he was able to bring in giving us a very compelling picture as to why infrastructure matters to us. Like I said, we could possibly go forward, have a decent life, words, but also in the process, the bargain, if you don't really raise up to the challenge, you could actually lose an opportunity for an entire generation. Ashok, a lot of interesting inputs. Thank you very much. Especially as an incoming team, I think you'll charge me nice boost, especially the areas of the survey. We do, for the record, we do a lot of surveys, regional level surveys in CI Coimbatore, but I don't know really whether we have asked a very simple question, how much goes out to the state and how much comes back. That's the level that you have to actually do the collective bargaining. And I guess it's a larger measure, the larger message from what you said. Have the courage to have those hard talks, really the ones that are going to break the ice and make us move forward to a path and make us globally competitive. Thank you. A beautiful, fantastic, and unforgettable speech. Thank you. Token of gratitude to our chief guest for being with us today, coming all the way from Dubai. I'd like to present a small gift, and I will request that he has the honor to please come forward with the presentation. It's a challenge. With that, we bring the public session of the annual day to a close. Thank you.